In 1775, 13 small colonies on the edge of a vast continent dared to defy the greatest empire on earth. What began as a protest over taxes and trade would ignite a revolution that changed not only a nation, but the entire world. By the mid-18th century, the British Empire stretched across the globe. Its red-coated soldiers guarded trade routes from India to the Caribbean. But across the Atlantic in North America, the colonies had begun to think differently. They were loyal to the king, but tired of being treated as subjects instead of citizens. After years of costly wars, Britain demanded new taxes from its colonies. Taxes on tea, paper, and everyday goods. The colonists had no say in Parliament, and they began to chant the words that would become their battle cry: "No taxation without representation." Tension exploded in 1773 when angry colonists in Boston boarded British ships and dumped chests of tea into the harbor. The Boston Tea Party was not just a protest, it was an act of rebellion. The British Parliament struck back with harsh punishments, closing the port and sending troops to enforce the law. But instead of fear, the colonies found unity. Across the continent, farmers, merchants, and writers began to call for something once unthinkable: independence. The first shots of war came in April 1775 at the towns of Lexington and Concord. British troops marched out to seize colonial weapons, but were met by local militias who refused to stand aside. Gunfire erupted, the shot heard round the world. The American Revolution had begun. The colonies formed a continental army and chose a tall, quiet Virginian named George Washington to lead it. Washington faced impossible odds. His soldiers were farmers and tradesmen, poorly armed and rarely paid, standing against the most powerful military on the planet. But they fought not for conquest, they fought for the right to govern themselves. In July 1776, representatives of the 13 colonies gathered in Philadelphia. After weeks of fierce debate, they approved a document written by Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence. Its words still echo through history. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. With that declaration, the United States of America was born, though its survival was far from certain. For years the war dragged on. Cities were burned, armies scattered, and thousands died in hunger and cold. The British captured New York and Philadelphia, forcing Washington's troops into brutal winter camps. Yet each defeat only hardened their resolve. The turning point came in 1777 at the Battle of Saratoga, where American forces surrounded and captured an entire British army. It was the victory the Revolution desperately needed, because it brought France into the war. For France, still smarting from its own defeat to Britain decades earlier, this was the chance to strike back. French ships and soldiers crossed the Atlantic to join the American cause. Suddenly, the rebels were no longer fighting alone. Britain now faced a global conflict, stretched thin across oceans and colonies. In 1781, the war reached its climax at Yorktown, Virginia. British General Cornwallis fortified his army near the coast, unaware that the French fleet had blocked his escape by sea. Washington marched south, joining forces with French commander Rochambeau. For weeks, cannon fire thundered over Yorktown. Surrounded and outnumbered, Cornwallis surrendered. The impossible had happened. The colonies had defeated the empire. 2 years later, the Treaty of Paris officially ended the war. Britain recognized the United States as a free and independent nation. The 13 colonies were no longer subjects of a king. They were citizens of a republic. The American flag rose over a new nation built not on conquest, but on an idea, the belief that liberty belongs to all people. The effects of that revolution rippled across the world. In France, reformers were inspired to rise against their own monarchy. In Latin America, leaders like Bolivar and San Martin would later invoke the same spirit of freedom. The American Revolution had set a precedent, that empires can be challenged and that ordinary people can shape their own destiny. America's struggle for independence was more than a war. It was a statement that freedom is not granted, but fought for. It was born from courage, disagreement, and sacrifice. It took farmers and philosophers, soldiers and dreamers, and turned them into founders of a new nation. From the cobbled streets of Boston to the battlefields of Yorktown, the revolution proved that an idea could be stronger than an empire. It transformed rebels into citizens, colonies into a country, and hope into history. The world watched and learned that the fight for liberty can begin anywhere, even with a handful of voices refusing to be silenced. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the History Vault for more tales of freedom, power, and the turning points that shaped our world.